There's also a scroll called the Safed Scroll that indicated that Jesus was the teacher of righteousness, and also it is part of the Toldat Yeshu documents that come against Jesus. In other words, if we found some scroll in Israel today that went back to the time of Jesus, indicating that Jesus was raised by the Essenes and that he was the one who was the teacher of righteousness, a lot of people from Israel would say, oh yeah, that's just a Christian document. They said that in order to try to let us think that Jesus was holy because he was associated with the true priests of Israel, those from Zadok. But that nobody can say that because this scroll is of the people who didn't like Jesus. They are the Safed scroll is now found to be the earliest of the Toldat Yeshu documents that are the Midrashic documents from about anywhere from the 3rd to 5th century A.D., and it was always believed that there was an earlier document and that someday that earlier document would be found. So, and that information that talks about Jesus is from people who don't like Jesus, who said, no, he didn't raise up from the dead. They didn't like Jesus. No, he wasn't born from a virgin. They didn't like Jesus. They did admit that he healed the sick, he healed the blind, and he raised the dead. But they said he did so from stealing the power from the rock, the foundation stone of Israel, rather than being the rock, which is the Christian testimony, the foundation of Israel. So this is important. The scroll discusses Mary's sons, Yeshu and Judas. And Yeshu was the name that that was used, Yeshua was shortened to Yeshu. It says one of the boys became a student of Hillel, that would be Judas, and the other became the leader of the Essenes, and that would be Jesus. This simple fact, when applied to the teaching of the Essenes about their teacher, has the potential to cause Ephraim and Judah to no longer hate one another. This finding, if explained properly, will allow us to take a new look at the Dead Sea Scrolls and the communities of the Zadokite priests that held them. It will help us to view the information that was sent to us in jars as that which is sealed up until the time of the end. Whatever else might be said of the Toldat Yeshu quotes, it is evident that a number of historical references are to Jesus and were accurate, and we got the following from the web. It said Miriam gave birth to Yeshua, whose name later depreciated to Yeshu. When old enough, she took him to study the Jewish tradition. Then it goes on, it says, he proclaimed himself the Messiah, claiming Isaiah's "a virgin shall conceive and bear a son," and other prophecies prophesied about him. Using God's name, he healed a lame man. They worshipped him as the Messiah. Vinegar was given to him to drink, and a crown of thorns was put on his head. He entered Jerusalem riding on an ass, but one of his followers, Judas Iscariote, told the sages he was in the temple. On the day before Passover, they hanged him on a tree. His followers on Sunday told that he was not in his grave, that he ascended to heaven as he had prophesied. Now, if we accept this as a starting point, their statements that they're stating about Jesus they always believed came from an earlier document, and so the earlier document is always perceived as being the one that's right, and the earlier document has been found. They've dated it 20 AD. It actually would have to be a little after 30 AD because it also speaks of the death of Jesus. But in stating that Jesus and Judas were raised by the Essenes and that one of them became the teacher of righteousness, we're now looking at the only one that it could be, and that would be Jesus. Because Christians are already saying, how come nobody's getting it? Jesus is obviously the one who is the teacher of righteousness. And all of these things are given in type also to represent the Messiah. Scripture says, our God is a rock. And now we understand how it is that the New Testament said that Christ is the rock and that he followed them from Egypt. But this rock is to be a stumbling stone for both houses of Israel. And the Toldat Yeshu which is this Midrashic literature that came against Jesus. And remember, in the time of Jesus, we find in the New Testament that it's speaking of those who are saying, no, you're not the Messiah. And it's speaking of the fact that the Messiah was going to have to die on Passover and be raised up 3 days later. And everybody knew that because that was the symbol of the Messiah that was supposed to take place in the heavens. And therefore, they put guards outside the tomb of Jesus so that they could stop anybody from taking his body and saying he'd been raised up. The Christians noted that Jesus was raised. The stone was moved, but there were those that would lie about that and say that Jesus had not been raised from the dead. Now we found this document, the Safed Scroll, the earliest copy of the Toldet Yeshu, using the same type of words. They are saying Jesus wasn't born from a virgin. They're using the same name, Stadia, as being somebody who had sex with Mary. They're saying they even go on and say he had sex with her during her period. But of course, we know scientifically now that if somebody has their period, they can't have a baby. The seed will not take place. It won't become a seed and cause a baby. So we know that the story that they stated is wrong from that's a lie. And now a number of Jews believe that the story is a lie too. It is no longer believed to be the truth by a number of people. In fact, we're finding a complete change here in Israel. But now the whole thing is that they stated that Jesus snuck in to the Holy of Holies and found a way to steal the name of God and used that name to heal the sick, raise the dead, and heal the blind. They don't deny that he did all of these things. So their documents stemming to the earliest tradition in the life of Jesus acknowledged that he did the things that the Messiah had to do, and that the scroll, Redemption and Resurrection within the Dead Sea Scrolls, was speaking of that their Messiah would do, who would be their teacher. So this scroll that came against Jesus is going to be the very same scroll that can lead us to the point where Ephraim no longer is against Manasseh, and Manasseh is no longer against Ephraim. The Toldet Yeshu material placed within the Talmud caused the Talmud to be banned by the Pope and by Luther, and caused Jews to be hated by Christians, and helped to add fuel to the fire of the Nazi war because they had said such terrible things about Jesus. But now all of Israel can find out that that's not true, because a woman can't get pregnant when she's got a period. Okay, so that's true. And there were other scrolls within the Gnostic scrolls where Jesus said, they'll call me a bastard. So he was onto that. And so now we also know that Jesus couldn't have stolen the name to cause his power, because he already had his power as a baby, the very power that he had to have, that a little child was to lead them, was to lead the meek and the poor. And he did so in Egypt. He didn't go to Jerusalem, crawl there as a baby and say, I think I'll get the name. Their claim from the Toldet Yeshu is that Jesus went into the Holy of Holies, and since there are dogs there that bark when you leave and cause you to forget the name, he wrote it upon his thigh. And they even go on and say that the book of Revelation, when it says he had his name on his thigh, is speaking of the fact that he wrote the name that was from the stone upon his thigh. And that they say that's what gave him the power to be able to cause miracles. But what we're seeing now historically is that Jesus, as a baby, was able to already perform the miracles that were required from the Messiah.